today, we're just going to cover a few basics, basically around some recent updates and some recent industry trends. And I'll jump into it, and I'm happy to take any questions along the way. And then we'll also have a question section at the end. That's us, proud sponsor, and certainly are of the SCA and all the good work that they do. And as I was suggesting, so today we're going to talk about some important legislative changes in the embedded network space that do affect bodies corporate, smart metering, and what that means for strata communities, and a general market update. We'll do a quick refresher on, why we have embedded networks and how they are great to start with. So why are embedded networks great? Well, importantly, they provide lower prices, much lower prices. We are talking 30 to 50% commonly, and the savings can even be greater when we have solar and in the future batteries and these sorts of things. One other important aspect of embedded networks is they give us the ability to contract energy for up to 5 years. And that helps communities have much greater control over what their energy prices will be and protects them from market volatility, and keeps prices generally much lower than the average market. Further to that, we've got this value that's created by the embedded network enabling the sharing of electricity and related things such as solar, batteries, EV charging systems and the like. Okay, we'll jump right into the legislative stuff. It does get a little bit dry, but I will try and keep it fairly brief and at an easy level. We'll do a little recap first. This is just a little bit of, I guess, body corporate electricity legislation 101. To sell electricity, you have to be either an authorised retailer, or you have to have an exemption to sell electricity without a retail license, basically. Body corporates that sell their own bulk electricity to all the residents that live in those buildings are considered exempt sellers, and typically use a billing agent model. That means that the body corporate has to comply with the retail exemption and network exemption guidelines. It also means that the body corporates are then taking on the risk associated with debt, compliance, and the wholesale market itself. What we are seeing is an industry shift where the retail model is becoming more preferred by basically all parties involved. Now, what the retail model changes here is that it shifts all the debt, compliance and market risks from the body corporate to the retailer. It simplifies and streamlines the management of utilities holistically for body corporates and strata managers. And then the electricity retailers have to comply with the retail electricity legislation. And as such, all the consumers and customers have the same protections and experience that they do in the normal electricity market. Okay, energy legislation is very complex and it's multi-layered. This is just a bit of background information. So over the top, we have our politicians that come up with policies and ideas and so on and so forth. The states have their own legislation as well as we have national legislation. So that makes things a bit more complicated. And then states also have their own body corporate legislation, which you would be aware of. And so we've got quite a bit of paperwork and information that, combines to make up the whole electricity legislation sort of basket, basically. From a practical point of view, there are three main bodies that control and operate the electricity market. We have the Australian Energy Market Commission. They make all the rules. We have the policemen who enforce the rules. That's the AER, or Australian Energy Regulator. And then we have the tradesman, the Australian Energy Market Operator, whose job is to operate the market. Embedded network legislation has been under increased scrutiny since about 2015. And we've seen a raft of reviews, a raft of changes. Some have been significant, and regularly, fairly frequently too. Basically it seems every year or every 2 years we're getting some reasonably significant change that's impacting on us as energy providers, but that's our core business, but it impacts on the strata managers of the body corporates, because every time there's a change, it's more administration, more complex, more understanding, more time, and more risk. So 2017, we've all been through the power of choice. That was one of the first significant changes. They then had an embedded networks reform proposal. That went on for quite a few years, but didn't pass a cost-benefit analysis, so it got voted down. Now, from 2022, body corporates must join the Queensland Ombudsman, so customers can make complaints against them. At the moment, that's free, but probably not for much longer. And from 23 onwards, there's been a real increase in the focus of the regulator on hardship provisions and assistance that's provided by exempt sellers and retailers alike, domestic violence and also just hardship in general. And then the topic of today is this recent review of the AER exemptions framework for embedded networks. We'll just pause on this shift to the retail model, because it's sort of part of the full story here. Why are we seeing this shift to the retail model? Well, one of the reasons is clearly explained or articulated on this slide. And this list on the left side is basically all the tasks and duties that a strata manager or committee typically have to do with the billing agent model. Review budgets, pay bills, manage cash flow, compliance, reports, education, queries, monthly debt, audits, etc., etc. As well, the committee is taking these risks around the compliance, the debt, and the market. One of the things that sort of flies under the radar here is that the penalties for non-compliance, as the legislation has become more and more scrutinised, the penalties for non-compliance have increased significantly. So what in the past for a non-compliance may have been an insignificant fine, now we're talking quite substantial amounts of money for any non-compliance. So shifting the compliance risk from the committee to a retailer who has to take those compliance risks anyway is a far more sensible way to go. And then, as we sort of depict here, all that the strata manager or body corporate have to do is basically pay one common power bill every month or every 2 months, depending on the billing cycle, as opposed to all this list of duties. The legislative requirements. So this was just finalised in August 2025, so actually on the 29th of August. So this is pretty much live hot off the press, as we might say. And these requirements impact bodies corporate that are acting as exempt sellers and selling electricity to the residents in their buildings. In summary, basically, the body corporate now has more requirements to provide additional assistance to hardship customers. There's additional reporting and transparency requirements, a removal of a deemed exemption whereby a small scheme didn't have to register as an exempt seller, but now they do, and some more strengthening of, I guess, the customer's rights and obligations. So again, just adding more complexity and administration to the compliance side of electricity selling. Some of the measures take effect immediately, but the others are sort of progressively rolled in from January 2026 to July 2026. So a bit of time to understand and implement the changes. What are the changes specifically? This is basically straight out of the legislation, so the wording's a bit legalistic, but basically there's a requirement now where any refund, any customer in credit has to basically receive their refund immediately. Now, that's been a bit difficult in recent years because the rebates, the significance of the government rebates have meant that cash flow has become a problem for bodies corporates that are buying and selling energy. So that could be a bit challenging when we have really high rebates, but other than that, it won't be a problem. As I said, expanded family violence policy and requirements, and a few administrative things, and also the requirement to publish the scheme's pricing relative to the local area's standing offer. Then the network exemption, which is the sister or brother of the retail exemption selling guideline, both pieces of legislation apply. They have some more onerous conditions around disconnection and when you can or cannot disconnect customers, when you have to reconnect or customers that have been disconnected, and more assistance with regard to customers that are having payment difficulties. So all of this just makes that debt collection part of it more difficult and drags it out, further, meaning that debt risk that the body corporates hold when they're selling electricity has sort of increased significantly over time as legislation sort of compounds on top of each other to make the act of getting someone to pay their electricity bills can be quite difficult. And there's a few other things around reporting and administration. So I'll just run over the summary of the key points with regard to that legislative review and the changes. And then if anyone's got any questions, just throw them in the chat around that and I'll answer them. So just to recap, body corporates that sell electricity now are considered an exempt seller, and they have to comply with both the retail and network exemption guidelines. The regulatory review that started end of 2023 finished in August, so last month, and there's some changes and additions that impact body corporates, mainly around additional hardship requirements and reporting and administration. Most of these changes are effective now, and some are being phased in over the next 12 months. And then, as I mentioned previously, there's a shift in the industry with a preference to a retail model due to its ability to simplify and streamline and de-risk the management of utilities. And these additional changes and complications are going to probably, accelerate that shift even further. Okay, so that's it for the legislation side of things. Okay, no questions in the chat there, so I'll go on here. I've got a little section on smart meters that I'll go through relatively quickly. There's a really important piece in here because we find that many in the industry are under a misconception that apartment buildings have to install smart meters. And now it's not mandatory when you have an embedded network. So I'll explain that. Simply put, what are smart meters? Well, the digital meters, they record energy in as small as 5-minute intervals, and they are basically enabling the energy system of the future. The reason that they're so important is that they are considered one of the key enablers for us to transition to the new energy system and to achieve net zero, because they allow the measurement and management of solar, batteries, electric vehicles, and the like. There is the belief that they do offer significant net benefits to the community. The AEMC, remember I mentioned before, the AEMC is the rule maker. They have basically now published final rules for the smart metering rollout. They did that at the end of last year. Now, these final rules are basically requiring a universal uptake of smart meters in the NEM. So that's the National Electricity Market, which covers Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, ACT, Tasmania, and South Australia. So universal uptake of smart meters by 2030. Except it doesn't cover embedded networks in strata, because all of those meters are private meters. They're not on-market meters. So there's no mandatory requirement to change to smart meters when you're in an embedded network. So this is the important information and message that I want to share with you guys today. As I mentioned, it's not mandatory to upgrade to smart meters in existing buildings that have embedded networks. However, if you don't have an embedded network and every customer in that building is an on-market customer, then yes, there will be the requirement to upgrade those meters to smart meters. The other couple of frequently asked questions we get around the smart meters is, should newly developed buildings have smart meters? The answer to that is yes, absolutely. Since 2017, and the introduction to power of choice basically means every new building built should have market compliant smart meters. Do smart meters reduce costs? Not really. Many cases they're a bit more expensive than manually read meters, but it's the benefits. So the key benefits of smart meters are they're considered the key enabler of our future energy system, and they provide a higher quality customer experience. They lead into data visualization, automation, and all that like. So these net benefits they talk about aren't necessarily a reduction in cost that we see tomorrow. It's more about the net benefit to the community over the long term. All that being said, are they a good idea for strata communities? Yes, absolutely. They're an important part of the future energy system, and where it makes sense and it's possible and feasible, I think it is a good idea for communities to look to upgrading if they can. And combined with the industry shift to retail, it's quite easy now for a body corporate to get a retailer to fund the upgrade to smart meters, as well as move to a much simpler way to manage utilities. Okay. Just check the chat. No questions on that. So that's smart meters done. Importantly, not mandatory, but a good idea. Okay, we'll do a quick look at what's happening in the energy market. That'll take me a couple of minutes, and then we'll have about 5 minutes at the end for questions. So what are the current interesting market trends? Renewable energy continues to increase in terms of how much electricity we get for renewables. The wholesale market has come down over recent times, and the volatility has significantly reduced. So we're seeing the lowest wholesale prices in about 4 years at the moment. In contrast to that, the network costs have gone up a bit in July, but that had a fairly minor impact on overall bills. And so the rapid price rises that we've seen over the last 3 to 4 years have probably come to an end now. Future price rises would probably be expected to be more in line with CPI. And the AEMC have actually forecast that we might see a decline in prices over the next 10 years. However, I'll believe that when I see it. I still think there's some risks that will put upward pressure on prices in the short term, in particularly as our coal-fired power stations become older and more unreliable. Hybrid vehicles are starting to outsell battery EVs, so that's an interesting trend, and that'll play into future forecasts of electricity consumption. Embedded networks, importantly for our strata communities, they continue to have a significant lower cost advantage. And the most interesting recent trend is the rapid increase in the installation of batteries. I'll have a quick look at that. So at the bigger scale, we can see, the base load effectively, or the support capacity of batteries building quickly in the wholesale market. So this is connected to the large grid. We've got 900 megawatts already installed. For scale and context, 900 megawatts is a fairly large coal-fired power station. So that's relatively large in terms of scale. There's 2,300 megawatts in construction and nearly 5,000 megawatts in planning. So these battery systems can be delivered really quickly relative to other energy projects. And so, in 2 or 3 years, batteries are going to become a significant part of our energy mix at the wholesale level. And in addition, now in parallel, the number of batteries being installed in households and small businesses has rapidly increased. There was nearly 20,000 installed in July, which coincides with a new rebate offered by the government where households and businesses can get up to about 30% off the cost of installing a battery on the upfront price. And we've seen with solar that these types of rebates rapidly accelerate deployment and uptake. So despite all that, despite the fact that renewables are dominating all new generation and capacity, and batteries are starting to become deployed faster and faster, our wholesale electricity prices are still dominated heavily by global coal and gas prices. So our graph here on the right shows black being coal, blue being electricity, and green being gas. And you can see that these curves are very strongly correlated, meaning that despite the fact that we've got so many renewables, it's still the global price of coal and gas that are the major influence of our electricity prices. Little practical tip for our Queensland body corporates. September has been the lowest time to buy electricity in Queensland for the last 3 years. So September's been the lowest price in the market, best time to buy electricity, and then it's now occurred for 3 years running. So for anyone that's got any contracts to renew or that are coming up to expiring anytime in the next 12 months, now's a really good time to look at renewing that contract. So a quick summary of key points and then on to questions. What's happening in the energy market? Renewable energy share of the market continues to increase rapidly. Battery installations are now taking off. Great news, July 2025, we can now, as a homeowner and a small business, get up to 30% rebate on our batteries. That will also apply for bodies corporate as a business that want to install a battery. Despite the rise in renewables, we are still impacted largely by coal and gas prices for our electricity market. Something to keep in mind. And September has been the best month to buy electricity in Queensland now for 3 years running. So good time to renew contracts. Okay, that's me. Thanks very much for joining us, everyone. And has anyone got any questions?
It doesn't seem to be any in the Q&A at the moment. So, oh, hang on. There we go. No, that's just a comment. Thanks, Jessica. That was very interesting, Ben. Thank you very much for that. If our members have any questions, is it okay if they email you directly?
Yeah, no problem at all.
Okay. All right. Yeah, let's see. Yeah, that was just yep, we're just getting lots of things. Yeah, like it's an interesting way that things are shifting. When you say the retail model, do you mean like that's where a body corporate might have an embedded network, but instead of trying to manage it themselves, they use a retailer like Humenergy? Would that be right?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay.
So embedded network, everything physically stays the same. It's
Yep.
just that the retailer takes the responsibility for buying the electricity and then takes responsibility for selling the electricity and all the risks and that go with that.
Okay.
The old-fashioned billing agent model in Queensland was the body corporate actually buys the electricity, and they actually, from a legal perspective, are the on-seller of electricity, but they have an agent that sort of does all the administrative work for them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So they might have a strata manager that would be taking that on in addition to the multiple
Yeah,
other things that they do.
not so much anymore, Wendy. So traditionally in
Mhm.
Queensland, the strata managers did used to do it as a value-added service, but as
Right.
legislation became too complicated and too costly and it became too specialised, I don't know of too many strata managers that do it themselves anymore.
Yeah. Plus
So
that whole thing
the
with
first
the
shift.
consumer kind of protection and
Yep.
stuff like that. I guess that's a whole other complexity that goes with it. So it would make sense to kind of move to a retail model. Thanks for clarifying that issue on the batteries as well, that it does apply to body corporates too.
Yep.
You know, to get those batteries and clock into the solar power. And I suppose a lot of developments have a lot of roof space for those solar panels too. So yeah.
Yeah, certainly. Any building really under 8 levels,
Yep.
they're worth consideration.
Okay.
Higher than that, generally the roof space isn't, in my opinion, large enough to make it worthwhile.
Okay.
But certainly if it's 8 stories and if it
Yep.
has a tin roof, really suitable for solar.
Right. There you go. Yeah. Yeah. And definitely kind of the way of the future, it actually prompted me to follow up my we're getting solar installed and I haven't heard from them. So it prompted me to go, I wonder what's happening with our installation,
Are you going to
because
get a battery?
yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
And
nice.
we're getting lots of panels. So we're going to be generating a lot of electricity, more than we need. But it's sort of, we've been kind of thinking about it, and then the rebates on the batteries has come in, and it starts to sort of kind of make sense, that's kind of the way to go. I mean, we've had a smart meter for a while, and they're great. As a consumer, they're fantastic because they tell you
Yeah,
um, where your electricity bill is being
yeah,
generated.
yeah.
What parts of your household are using the most electricity, and it allows you to kind of go, oh, maybe we should turn the TV off at night, not have
Yes,
it on standby and stuff like that. So yeah,
exactly.
no, it's great. It's great. So again, thank you very much for that. We have recorded this session, or we're still recording it actually, till I switch it up, and we will make that available too, because I think that's some fantastic information in there, and you've done a really good job, Ben, of putting that together, and yeah, kind of explaining it all. It's yeah. So thank you very much to Ben. Thank you all for attending. And again, if you have any questions, we've got Ben's email address on there on that slide. So do feel free to ask any questions or make any inquiries. You can also send them through to me and I'll pass them on to Ben. So thanks again for joining us and enjoy the rest of your lunch.
Thanks all. Thanks, Wendy.
Thanks, Ben.
See ya. See ya.